And welcome. So this is the Gestalt Media book chat, and today we're going to be talking with David Allen Voyles. I got your name right this time.
Hey,
And
I've arrived.
we're going to be talking about his collection of horror, Christmas-themed horror in the 13th Day of Christmas and other Tales of Yuletide Horror. So everyone's here. I'll start us off pretty easily. Why?
Why Christmas horror? Yeah,
Why
'cause
Christmas
that's what's
horror?
missing.
What brought that?
Yeah,
Why?
everybody,
Great.
all that joy and stuff. We need a little horror at Christmas time. I just felt that's what was missing.
You've
Now
never had Christmas with my family.
No, actually, it was a natural product of the ghost tours that I was doing. And when I ended the tours, and we did that for 3 years, and then we decided, well, we either need to expand this business or shut it down. And we didn't have the money to expand it. So we shut it down. And I thought, well, I've been doing these things. We had a holiday tour and I had 3 stories that I felt would work for that. I said, why don't, I must try to it was summertime at that point. And I said, I'm going to put some stories together and see if I can't come up with a collection of stories for Christmas. Well, I couldn't get them ready by that Christmas. 13 stories was going to be a bit much. So the next Christmas then is really when this came about, last Christmas, to have these stories in place and put them out there. But, Christmas actually, it's not a totally alien concept because the Victorians did it. Dickens' whole thing about, the Christmas Carol, that's a ghost story. And they like to celebrate at Christmas by telling ghost stories. So I just kind of wanted to bring that back.
Cool. Well, yeah, I think it's a natural fit, and it was funny because right before we met, I was thinking that I wanted to find an excellent collection of horror-themed Christmas stories or Christmas-themed horror stories. I'm gonna get that wrong every time. And I thought we were gonna have to go to like 15 different authors and get on the right one, but it turns out one dude was already working on it. So I appreciate that. You made it a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
For us, you just happen to have exactly what we wanted, so I'm pretty thankful for that. I know that your second book, Tales from the Hearse, which will be coming out this year, has a lot of the stories you told while you were doing the ghost tours in Asheville. Were any of the ones in this book, were they ones that you told on that trip, or were they inspired by your tour service in any way? Or were they?
There were, as it turns out, there were 3 that I did tell on the circuit, because we actually had a regular season, of course, and then decided we'd have a holiday season, make it very special for people. We had apple cider. We took them to a little amphitheater, and they had to get out of the hearse and walk into this dark amphitheater, and I'd tell one of the stories there. So that was the story I told the most, and was the first one, really, the Christmas Eve in the graveyard. And then the other 2 stories, one of them I think I only told one time. And at that point, it was called a Montford Christmas, because in Asheville, the Montford area is a neat area. It's kind of a historic area. And you have all these Victorian homes. And that was the way I pictured that setting for that story. And we would drive by there, but the tour was going, the drive to get from where we were to where we ended the tour to let them back out, it was such a short drive, like, you didn't hardly even see the houses. I think I told it one time and said, I don't know, that we really got too many stories. I need to take it out. So I did tell that one. And then one of the other stories we told on the tour, but most of them are too dark for telling on a family ghost tour.
Yeah, a few of
So
them
I just
were.
thought, well, that'll be the springboard for that. So really only 3. And, to tell the truth, even though it's kind of misleading in the title, that Tales from the Hearse, there's only one story in that actually of that new collection. So most of those are all different stories rather than ones that were told. They're inspired by the idea of telling stories in the hearse, but again, they're way darker than what I would probably tell especially with children on a tour. Although it would be fun to scare them. I have to admit, it would be kind of fun to do that.
Yeah.
I want to know if you had any
horrifying experiences with Santa Claus when you were young?
Yeah, that is a recurring motif. Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah, there's some creepy Santas in this collection. A little bit of a variety of creepy Santas, I think. I don't recall really any. I think when I was little, like a lot of kids at the mall or whatever, when they first came, there were some creepy Santas, but I didn't really have any major upsetting episodes with them that I remember. If I have, I blocked them out. Creating them in there now. But I feel like actually when I look at myself in the mirror now and doing this, I feel like I'm Santa Claus telling the stories. Come up on my lap, little kid. Let me tell you a story. You know, that would probably be a one-day affair at the mall, and that would be it.
And the cops get called, and it's terrible.
You'd be fired.
Yeah, I think I'd get fired quick.
As you know, I struggled reading because I'm a wuss, but I found that Jason's description was very good, that it was more Twilight Zone-ish instead of like gonna keep me awake at night. But I am glad I didn't read it at Christmas, because I think it would have creeped me out more. But I did love the novella, and it reminded me, it was reminiscent of Black River by Dean Koontz. Have you guys seen or read that?
I haven't read that one.
Where people can't leave a town.
Yeah.
Where they're stuck in a town. So it was really reminiscent for me of that. And but I really love the novella. What was your inspiration for it, or what kind of led you to that?
I'm kind of not sure what the actual inspiration was for that. I didn't intend for it to be longer than the others, but I did have the plan of it being 13 days. And by the time I started going with 13 days, I just realized there's no way to keep this in a short story length. No. It's still shorter it's even short for a novella, really, but it's longer than a short story. So it was more of the vision of the image of I just thought a creepy thing that would happen is, what if you got up on Christmas morning in a little town and there was, everybody likes to build snowmen and all that kind of stuff. But what if there was this structure, this little crypt, totally made out of snow, and nobody knew where it came from? The idea of nobody owning up to it, even though, everybody would say, well, I bet I know who it is. But I thought that would be kind of a cool thing. And then the idea of not being able to leave and then being isolated and cut off from everything. Now, you mentioned Dean Koontz. What I was worried about after the fact was that it would be like Stephen King's story, The Dome. I mean, that's the concept it has in common. And I hope and think that's the only parallel, is just, again, you can't leave this particular area. And other creepy things happen. But yeah, I did that. And I think too, what was a big influence on that novella, the whole series, the original concept of what I was shooting for was to have a line from a song, from A Christmas Carol, for each story. And I had them. And when I was ready to print and do the book in the first place, I would have the title, and I had these lines from a carol, A Christmas Carol, and it would, somehow be connected to the idea of the story. But then when I started and I was self-publishing that, I hadn't met Jason at that point, and I dawned on me, I don't know about copyright stuff for all these lines in the Christmas Carol. Some of them obviously are old enough that wouldn't be a problem, but some are more modern songs, not in the public domain necessarily. I said, I just don't want to even go there. So I took out all of those lines. But in the 13th Day of Christmas, I could kind of bring them back in, some of them back in a creepy way. And I did like the way that Christmas carols play on the phone, even though the phones don't work, but you have that element. So that
was creepy.
Yeah, you nailed it.
But I did love how you pulled in lines from the Christmas carols, and something that we normally hear and think of like happy times, and turn them into something like really dark and gloomy. I really like that part.
Yeah, I'm glad, because I was hoping that would come across that way. But that was fun, and it was a real challenge when I was trying to do the whole 13 stories. I don't know how many times how many songs are actually referenced in the novella, but to come up with the 13 was kind of hard at places. I had to stretch, even though it'd be an obvious Christmas song, and not to reuse it where you wanted to use it somewhere else.
Right.
Like the Christmas Eve in the Graveyard, a lot of things could have worked for that, you know.
Right.
That was probably, I'll jump in without even having a question on that, but there's one thing about that story, that's one of my favorites, because it was, I don't know, for some reason it affected me very emotionally. And when I told that story, even though I had to write it out, you know, in the first place, but that was a story that I'd sit on the little stage in the amphitheater and have my old 6 people sitting on the front row in the dark. And I literally had the flashlight on my face, like a campfire, like a camp counselor, you know, telling ghost stories. But I did have a little electric fire behind me. I just had a projection. There's a little handheld thing, and you could project a fire on the backdrop of the set. It was a little Shakespearean theater, and I just shoot that on the back, and I'd sit on the edge of the stage and tell it. But that story and that character, I like the narrator of that story, that old man, which, you know, it's funny where your inspiration comes from. What I pictured or what I heard in my mind, actually, the man is an African-American character. That's didn't matter, but that's just the way he was. But his voice was actually my wife's grandfather, and the way he spoke and the cadence which he spoke is really cool to have that voice going in your head when you're writing something. If you have a real person in mind, it just made it so real. And I would get real emotional at the end of the story sometimes and get choked up because it's got a kind of a sweet ending, I think. And I just really liked that character. So out of those really dark stories, that's at least one of the brighter notes in the whole book.
That was personally my favorite one. I feel like that to me captured what I think of Christmas ghost stories. That story in particular, where it's creepy and it's scary, but there's kind of there's something more there.
Yeah,
and I really liked that it was all told from that old man's perspective. It was really cool. And I could totally, now that I know that was one of the stories you told, I could totally see that in my head.
Picture that well, and it is good because it's a character talking. You know, it is much more of a narrative kind of a thing. I'm glad to hear that you do like that one. I wanted to have a lot of different types of stories, so there wasn't just the same thing over and over. So there's that kind of sweet type of story. I think there's the most classic ghost story in it, I think, is I had to rename it, so I always have to stop and think what the new name is. But it was called A Christmas Promise. It was originally the Montford Christmas one, but that's the 2 old ladies in the house and their brother who come to visit every Christmas. That's a real traditional Christmas setting. And I, again, borrowed family to make that story happen. I changed things quite a bit, but it was my grandmother is Merle. Her sister really was Gladys. They had a third sister. She didn't make the cut for the story. And,
maybe next time.
Yeah, next time. Sorry, Marjorie. And then my grandfather, who Merle was married to, I just changed him and made him their brother. And I moved them to Asheville instead of being in Florida where they all grew up. But both women obviously were not old maids. They both were married. They both had preachers, Baptist preachers, for husbands, which I thought was kind of unique. But I thought having them as these 2 old maids would be kind of a fun thing. And again, it made them come to life. And like I said, a very traditional ghost story, but different from the other things where it got really dark.
And that one was touching too, I think. That was a touching, sweet story. I think that's one of the first you told me to read because you thought I could take it.
Ease you into it, right?
Now, my 2 favorites, and they were both very creepy, was The Bloody Wall.
Oh, really? Oh, neat.
That was really creepy. And I loved the Last Minute Shopping one.
Oh, yeah.
That was my favorite.
That was awesome.
Oh, great. That's an odd story, and it took me places I didn't really know where I was going to go. But I did, like you talked about Twilight Zone, that has, to me, at first, to start with, a real Twilight Zone feeling. Like, what if you were in the mall? And there is a Twilight Zone episode that was redone even in the mall. I don't know when they redid them in the 80s, I think, of being in a mall, you know, or the mannequins that come to life. And this wasn't the mannequins coming to life story, but it was still, what if you just woke up on Christmas Eve and you were the only one in the mall, and yet you could hear those Christmas carols, all of a sudden the Christmas carols would take on a different tone.
Yeah.
It would just be real weird to be hearing them and that, that over the speakers. And I thought that'll be fun to play with. What if you were in the mall by yourself and hearing the Christmas things until the stuff starts to happen.
Yeah, but it made me wonder what was happening, like if they were stuck in another dimension or what was going on. So, and I really liked how you wrapped that up.
The voices in and out, like they were picking up the transmission, and they keep walking, and he'd keep walking, and that stuff.
Come back to where they really were, and like two dimensions where you were just out of sync a little bit, and you weren't hearing what was going on there. I was hoping that came across. That was a hard thing to do, and you just hope. I hope this comes across.
It did. You did well.
That's the story that actually took Anna out.
Oh, really?
Like she started reading it right when we were going to publish. And so I usually have her read everything and give me the thumbs up on it. And she got to, I think, that one, and she was like, I can't read this.
Yeah, it's like the first one.
Well, in the copy that you sent us,
it was not.
I don't know if it was the first one or not, but it might have been. And she's like, man, I can't read this. So, and because of that, I ended up reading the whole thing, and I was reading the novella. I think it was in November, and I was halfway through that, and it started snowing, which doesn't happen that often here.
Yeah, it's early.
I was like, great. This. I had to stop reading it and go to another house that's right over there. So I had to walk across this big open field in the snow, and I was like, not cool, man. It's not the day for this. It could have been any other day of the week. It had to be right now. So, I feel like it's a book that's good any time of year, but during the holidays, it does carry that little extra something, and it's great for people who are looking for something that's not a Christmas Story or Citizen Kane or whatever you're forced to watch every year. I love Christmas Story, but I've seen it enough I don't need to see it again.
You watch Citizen Kane every Christmas? That's a weird tradition.
Which one? Oh, whatever. I mean, I think I was thinking Wonderful Life.
Yeah,
there you go.
Wonderful Life.
But there's snow and a little scene and Rosebud and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
there's a sled.
It makes sense.
There's a sled.
Spoiler, there's a sled at the end.
Yeah. I gave away the whole movie.
Yeah.
Oh, well. If you haven't seen it by now, I think the window's passed.
The story I really liked was the Toy Maker one, because I really liked what was really cool about that is you weaved all these different kind of legends about Santa Claus into this one character that were in a way that was really creepy. There was the stuff about naughty and nice, and there was stuff about writing a list to Santa, and it was really cool. That was a really cool story. I don't know if it was so much scary. There was definitely a creepiness to it.
Yeah.
But it was just very cool how all those kind of elements came together. I really
I appreciate that, because you try and that is really what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to another, not a culture that I'm familiar with really, but an old European feel.
Sure.
And blend a lot of ideas about St. Nicholas. And so you have old Nick, and he's lived a long time, and he is that figure, but he's really not the Santa Claus that everybody else knows of. But I like him a lot. He's a good guy, but you better not mess with him. There is that element to it that I really did kind of like.
That naughty and nice thing going down, because everybody thinks of Santa as being jolly, but obviously he's somebody who keeps track of the stuff that you've done wrong.
Yeah, he knows.
And I love that story. That is my favorite story outside of the novella, because it shows off your range. Because it's such a very different storytelling style. It's hard to pull off. It's got a lot of Charles Dickens in it.
There's 3 different threads going on in that one story.
There were.
Really cool. Yeah.
3 families and different dynamics in each one, and so that there was even an angle of, without spoiling it for people who haven't read it, there's, the typical thing, or children are getting toys, but then there's that family that has a very special request that maybe you don't want to have happen. I mean, whether that's a good thing or not, to have a just setting it up that's a child that's you've lost.
Yeah.
And hoping to have be reunited and have an opportunity there. It could, what does Saint Nick or Old Nick in this case do? Also, by the way, the name Nick, it's not just Santa Claus. Old Nick is Lucifer as well. So you kind of have a good and evil possibility there. But I like just the possibility that the name makes you wonder a little bit about things and whether that was a good thing or not. I don't think he's evil. I'll say that about the character in the story, but he does. You had some pretty freaky things happen with the bad kids.
Oh yeah,
I loved that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That scene,
that was very Twilight,
I really liked the scene that's spooky, and I would encourage people that if you like that story, if you go online, go to Dark Corners and listen to that story, that scene is freaky as all get out. And I use Mamba Ullman's. I always use Mamba Ullman's music, but it just. The tension of what happens with the toys at that point is that's when it actually was augmented, and it's even better than the way the story was. It just came across real well when you add that audio to it. That's a pretty freaky scene, I thought, for a story that's really not necessarily one of the darkest stories in the book.
Yeah.
But that one seems kind of heavy duty, at least for the audio version of it. I'm glad people like that story. And again, because you don't know, I'm thinking, wow, here I am. I don't really know that much about Bulgarian culture, but I looked it up a little bit to see some stuff to give it a little bit of feeling of realism. But it was fun to visit that idea and that culture and see what it would have been like. So I appreciate very much that y'all did like it.
It was my second favorite one.
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
Real quick, since he seems to be wanting to make an appearance.
Hey, Luke.
A character that you have in the series is the Slender Man, basically the magician and that kind of thing. And I thought he was a really cool, really neat character. So I was wondering if you have any like future plans for him, or
yeah, I do indeed. There's actually I'm trying to think if he actually makes an appearance in there. He's referenced, I'll put it that way, in a story in Tales from the Hearse. And I want to make a whole sequence of stories. The comic book, I'd really like there to be a comic book that has that character. He's Professor Mephisto. That's the Christmas Present is the name of that story. It used to be called The Nightmare Box. But and that story is the oldest story of anything I've written. I mean, it is probably at least 20 years old. I wrote it 20 years ago, and you go back to it and revisit it and write it again. But so did change the name because I decided, since we've been talking, that I think it would be a good thing to have that character be a central thing for stories. His basic premise being, you get a nightmare box, you open that box, and you're going to have a very interesting dream. And so there's another. You don't see Professor Mephisto. I didn't emphasize him as much, but the box appears in a story in Tales from the Hearse. So yeah, it's going to come up again. And I really would like to do a continuing thing so that a comic book that had several of these stories with him in it, and he could be the frame in which these other stories take place. I think he'd be a good character. I like that.
He is. He's a guy. He'd make a good host, a terrifying one, but but I like him.
That whole thing at the that came from an actual nightmare, a dream. I don't really have many nightmares, but years ago, the idea of the theater and being in a theater, I just had the image. It didn't go through all the crazy stuff that happens with that kid in there. Thank goodness. That would have been a little bit more than I like to handle. But the idea of a curtain just opening and the fog rolling out with a cemetery scene being there that just kind of goes into oblivion, that was what I recall. And the people sitting in the seats being like mannequins, but they're just sitting still, and you hear all the noise, but they don't move. That wasn't a dream. And so that I thought, well, that needs to be made into a story. That definitely needs to make its way in. So so I couldn't call it Nightmare Box anymore because I'm thinking that that'll be a series of stories, and the Nightmare Box will be the whole thing. So I had to make it the Christmas Present. Not a very original title, but another little kid who kind of had it coming. He might not have deserved as much, but
That's the one I read first.
He was kind of a rotten kid, though. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a rotten kid. He wanted to spoil Santa Christmas for his sister. I mean,
Yeah.
So when you're writing these stories, do you creep yourself out enough that you have trouble sleeping at night?
I don't think they go to bed with me, but I did get creeped out with the 13th Day. I think the 13th Day is the darkest thing I've written. That's the way it felt to me. There were times when you'd get to the end of a scene there and just sit back and go, whew,
Wow.
that's a lot.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I had to write the Santa Claus story just so that I knew that we had all these stories. I was looking at the book and I said, well, there's some stories that are kind of light, but they're getting ready to go into, I knew I was going to put the 13th Day, the novella at the end. It'd be the last thing and build up to that. And I thought, this is getting ready to be so dark. I'm going to just lighten the mood deliberately with a humorous thing. And I thought also it'd be kind of fun to do something light and throw something silly in there with Santa Claus and Santa Claus in a haunted house. Nobody's done that. But that one I didn't dream about, and I haven't had that kind of problem. But I wondered if I was going to when I was writing it. It really did have that impact of like, that's the dark stuff right there. I worried about it just because it's again, I don't like to surprise. I don't want to spoil anything, but it just overall was a very, very dark book.
And there were some sad stories, or there were some sad parts in the novella as well.
Yeah.
That really hit me hard.
Really hard-hitting things. Yeah, Dawn Hosmer kinds of things,
Yeah, exactly.
Family tragedy. That kind of stuff.
Man.
Everyone dies.
Yeah, the family member dies, and then the dog gets run over, and then somebody has cancer. That's a Dawn story.
Oh.
It was,
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for the story In the Flesh Appearing, where on earth did you get the inspiration for that one?
I'm trying to think about which came first kind of thing. The idea afterwards, it became kind of a popular thing. And I saw that people had actually had a photograph of putting dolls together to create this big person, a life-size doll. And that I'm not sure if I saw that first. I think I had the idea of it, and then it's like when you see somebody do it and you go, oh no, that was my idea. But I can't swear to the fact that maybe it was vice versa, and I did see that. But it is a creepy idea to think of something that could be kind of, all the parts of a doll. And the idea of a tulpa that you can, we talked about that before on one of the Into the Unknown, beyond, that series, that there is the concept that if you project enough of your energy into something, that an inanimate object could take on life.
It makes me want to go check my attic because kids, dogs, animals, and we always the babies are always torn apart and stuff, and it's like, I don't know where the leg for that thing is. That one kind of creeped me out.
Yeah, well, I will say dolls creep me out anyway. I did have nightmares as a child about dolls.
I can't do porcelain dolls. Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
I think dolls are creepy. I mean, I think they can really be creepy. A lot of people are creeped out by clowns, but I think dolls have the potential to be, and that's why I'll work with them a lot in stories. The Twilight Zone and ventriloquist dolls or dummies, that's like right at the top. Yeah, that's right. We'll do that because those, and I love it because I've got 2 or 3 stories that are kind of ventriloquist based. I don't know if they all made it into. No, they didn't all make it into Tales of the Hearse, but there's some ventriloquist doll stories that are on the way. They're going to be.
And those really resonate with people. People get creeped out by dolls.
Yeah,
they do. They for sure.
So you're onto something there.
Yeah, there's a Dark Corners episode that deals. I think it was inspired by the Island of the Dolls, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right. The Island of the Dolls with that. And they've now had TV episodes about that. But yeah, that's heard about that, that really was a case of going like, that is a creepy thing. And at the time, I didn't know what the real story was to the Island of the Dolls, but thought I'd like to write one. So yeah, that's something that's in Tales of the Hearse to look forward to. And y'all know about that, right? I mean, it's in Mexico where there's just hundreds, if not thousands, of dolls hanging in the trees, and you can go there. You can actually go there and see these dolls hanging in the trees, and they've been there for years. And yeah, so I have a story about that, because that would creep the living daylights out of me. The funny story from my family about me and dolls. I mean, like I said, when I was like 3 or 5 years old, I had a dream. I've told you all this before in some of the other episodes, where I woke up and there was a doll chasing me in the dream. When I woke up, there were teeth marks on my arm. So as 3 years old or whatever, that's like really going to freak you out. So dolls have just always been a thing. When we were on a family vacation in Florida, we went to a haunted house that was in Orlando. I don't think it exists anymore, but it was year round, but they blocked off a whole block on Church Street. And it was called Terror on Church Street. And it was great. And it was a walkthrough. And so you'd get little groups of people, small groups of people, to go in a group and walk through. So we were in the waiting room or whatever, and there weren't very many people. Ended up, I don't know if there were 7 or 8 people. And so they point to me and go, okay, you're the leader. Okay, we're in trouble. And it's very dark. It's just so dark. That was the biggest thing. But we went into one room, and it's like an attic, and there is just filled with dolls. And my wife's the one who then said behind me, "Oh no, we're all in trouble." I'm the first one. That's not going to be a good thing. Of course, I learned then that being the first person is actually a good thing in a haunted house, because you're not the one that gets the jump scares.
That's right.
They wait just a little bit. So there's a little tip for people in haunted houses.
Speaking of Church Street, I really liked how you used in the novella. You used a lot of Asheville came through in that, and how you had the things popping. I won't say what, but you had stuff popping up all over the city, and like when everything just kind of shut down.
Yeah,
and I was like, man, it's so cool to see these landmarks, but to think of them in such a creepy way.
I do like to pull in familiar things, and I will say I create in my mind, this is like a little non-Asheville, but even smaller town than Asheville. But
yeah,
but you definitely catch things that I like to pull in from North Carolina and Asheville to put them in a story. But yeah, I envision this little, not Mayberry, but a mountain version of a little town like that that's very picturesque, and then becomes isolated.
They were outside Thomas Wolfe Auditorium, as far as I'm concerned. But
yeah, I would. You do have to envision, and a neighborhood not far from there when he has to make it on his own through the snow ultimately on foot. That's
the scariest part of that story for me, because I could totally imagine that happening. Like, now my car's covered in snow and I got to walk through this. Oh, look at all these creepy snowmen. This is great.
I do have I'm so worried about the snowmen, because you know what actually I picture in my mind, which is counterproductive, is Calvin and Hobbes snowmen.
Oh yeah.
I love the Calvin and Hobbes snowmen, and they're terrifying. But I thought, what if snowmen, if snowmen could be really scary, and they could be if they started moving around.
Is that you made them scary.
They had arms and legs, and they could do stuff like that. And then you didn't see them at first; you just knew that they had moved.
Yeah.
I love that,
You managed to make the least scary part of Christmas a little terrifying.
Well, I'm glad I did my part. Let's get those kids in bed.
That's where they need to be.
They'll never sleep on Christmas Eve again, right? Oh man!
Just built snowmen outside their windows. They're watching you.
Yeah. Now that would be so fun. That would be the thing to do, without a doubt. Yeah.
So mean. I noticed another common thing that was in a lot of the stories was that people wouldn't believe the experience that others were having, and I feel like that kind of added a layer of horror to the stories, like the Bloody Wall, for instance. Nobody else could see or believe that these people were seeing the blood on the wall. And I feel like it almost adds a question of, is this person just losing their mind? Is this really happening? Yeah. And I think that added another layer to it.
I like
that intentional.
Yeah, I do like doing that. I think the Bloody Wall, I don't know if I set out to do a mystery, but there are a couple of stories that are just basically mysteries. That one and the Belfry story, the Haunted Belfry, are kind of ghost stories, but they're mysteries. What was behind that? So they kind of have that in common. But I think a common thing with me is the idea of, is it real or is it all in somebody's mind?
Right.
And that happens over and over with me. And I kind of resolved the Bloody Wall for people. But I'm notorious for leaving it where you don't know. To me, that's the best part of it, is to go, that's up to you. I don't know whether it's if it was in his head or if it was, really supernatural. And there's a lot of that because I've, doing the ghost tours, and then I got the opportunity to go with a sensitive to go scout out things and do investigations. And, was what happened, was it real, or did we kind of project it to be real? Or are we interpreting things in our own way because we want to see things happen this way or not? So I think there's a lot of room for, doubt. I wonder, Elaine, I don't know if you want to even mention things like that of your own experience, but if do you ever doubt yourself about things, or you go, nope, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. That's
like every day. Doubt myself. There's tons of doubt involved.
Is there?
Yeah. Especially up until recently. I mean, it takes an incredible amount of trust within yourself, trusting that you're protected and trusting that you're safe, trusting, my guides, my spirit guides, and that they're leading me where I'm supposed to be. And until I got to that point, I doubted everything, and you excuse everything, oh, that was just this, or oh, well, maybe it could have been this instead, and because it's almost like you don't want it to be real, you know what I mean? But then
I can imagine.
Then you're like, oh, well, maybe it was real, maybe it happened, and then it's like, well, then how come I didn't believe it when it was happening? It's strange, but you have to kind of get to that point, where you're trusting before you stop questioning so much.
Well, like you and the person that I was referring to that I've done things with and gone on trips with, I want the experience. I mean, I'm writing stories to entertain. I mean, that's basically all that's about, and not trying to say this is real or anything like that happens. But I do want it to come across realistically. And you wonder about folks like you, if you go, well, that's pretty hokey. Nothing ever happens like that. And I know some of them are, because they're almost deliberately that way. But I mean, and without giving anything away there, I'll tell the folks that are listening and the rest of y'all here, I sent a story to Elaine for one of the Tales of the Hearst stories, just to say, there's a character who I think is like you in a sense and is sensitive, and I wondered if this comes across as being really goofy or does it come across realistically. So yeah, I and even in that story, which I'll leave it to everybody, they'll have to discover it on their own. I still like leaving it like, did it really happen or not? For the reader to have to decide.
I kind of feel like the novella kind of ends kind of ambiguously, doesn't it? It kind of ends in a very ambiguous way, which I thought was super cool. Like, because then you're left thinking, because and I don't want to give anything away either, because I think everybody should read it. It's freaking amazing. But the last day, when you get to the last day, and it's very ambiguous, and you're very like, did any of that actually happen?
That's very deliberate, and I do have that kind of feeling about that, and wanted it to be that way, because it is very psychological at the very least, whether this stuff is happening or not. And
especially towards the end,
yeah, right there at the end, it escalates and it gets crazier and crazier. And for the main character, I like that character too. And I think, Dawn, I think for your characters, I think you get attached to your characters when you're writing. Do you not?
Oh, yes.
And so I was this one, like, I like the guy who tells, the guy in the graveyard, Christmas Eve in the graveyard, but that's a short story. It's very sweet, but it's so contained. But when you're writing a little bit longer and it takes longer to write one and you get involved with this, I mean, that character in the 13th Day, he got to me. I mean, I was wrapped up with that character. And so when it gets real intense at that point, it was hard stuff to take. And I also made a lot of other things deliberate without, again, spoiling things too much. But the people, I'm sure, would have questions at the end of the 13th day of, there's a scene I do at the beginning and a scene I do at the end involving a raven, a bird, which, by the way, nobody would necessarily get this. I don't mean it, but it's one of the things I just do for my own pleasure and just to be a little funny thing. Having a bird in a pear tree was kind of, I wanted to go there. So there actually is a mention of the bird goes into a pear tree at one point, and then raven. So it's not a partridge, but it's still making a little bit of a Christmas connection. But the idea of that whole story did have a very visual thing for me that sparked the whole thing, aside from the crypt at the beginning, of a vision of looking from the sky down at the earth and just seeing everything being snow covered.
Yeah.
And once everything is snow, when you have those snowy times, everything's so literally dead quiet. Snow deadens sound, and it's just a different feeling, like being in a graveyard. And it just gave me that feeling like, what if everything is a graveyard? The snow kind of turns everything into a graveyard. So that was kind of a basic image to work with in that whole story that just kind of permeated it. And so there are lots of things about graveyards and snow in that story.
And I did like how you used the raven to kind of tell us the truth of what really did happen in the story, because like you said, you were guessing or wondering, did this really happen? Is it just this town? What's going on? And then you use the raven to say, here's what's really going on.
And it's not happy. But it was a real visual thing for me too. Very cinematic. This was like a movie in a way. When I wrote it, I don't know if y'all have that experience or not, but very visual, very much seeing these things happen as you're writing them and picturing them as you to me it's a movie. It's like, every writer would say, I want my story to be a movie, but I really do picture it as being like a TV movie, even, where it's like several nights and you have the sequence of things. That would be kind of fun. So definitely pictured that. And so the very last scene, and again, I'll do it without spoiling anything, but it's very visual, where you're pulling away from the earth and you're looking at things from literally a bird's eye view. So I appreciate the fact that, again, that worked.
I love that. Very well. I wanted to share my favorite line in the whole book, if I can find it. You said, for one, it was on page 234, so it was the 6th day of Christmas. And you said, for one, we're dealing with a who, and with the other, a what. And that line to me was so chilling, because it really, I can write about people killing each other, okay, that just happens. But changing it from a who to a what, I don't know. That just sent shivers down my spine. That was like one of my favorite lines in the book.
Oh, cool. That's so good to hear, because that is kind of the goal, because it's even more of the unknown. And obviously what scares us and what horror is all about is the unknown. And once we know, it takes the scare part away from it. And even in a lot of our good horror movies, it's the unknown until it becomes known, and then you're just dealing with a thriller or an axe killer or axe murder or whatever, and that can be thrilling, but then you're falling back, in my opinion, on just the shock element of a surprise, a jump scare. And jump scares are all done in their place, but my goal is to creep you out in another way and make you think about, and so that what instead of a who means, oh man, the universe just opened up with some real creepy possibilities. And and
that's what I think all your stories did. All your stories led to that. Like, you're not dealing with the who, you're dealing with the what. And I felt like that line summarized what you've done throughout the book.
That's good to hear, because I've wondered about that. To me, it's like, there's a kind of, I don't know that I'd say I have a universe in mind, but there is kind of a concept of, like, maybe that's what ghost stories are. It's like different dimensions of realities, different realities all at the same time. And so in this one, there's the positive rate in a little bit of this is that as dark as it may get, well, that's just one world. There might be another version where that didn't happen.
I need to remember that theory.
But but I'm going to take you into that other dark world for a little bit, because to me, that's like going on a dark ride, the actual carnival ride, or going into the haunted house. And that's my goal. I took you in a hearse and told you stories. I would love to have the money to be able to make a true haunted house where you have to walk to it, or a haunted theme park. I mean, I would do the whole thing and have my own way of doing it. But it's temporary. It's a way that we deal with what scares us. And of course, what we all deal with is the idea of death. I have thought about it constantly, like, why do I do this? Why am I so absorbed? I'm not a bad person. I haven't killed anybody. I really don't have bodies buried in the yard.
Sure.
So why am I so obsessed with this? Why do I like that when I really feel like I'm a good person? But I think it's because it's the way I deal with death. It's the way that I deal with those other things that are just unpleasant, because we have control over the stories that we create. And even if we're on the reading end of it, or if we're on the viewing end of it, it comes to an end eventually. And you get to say, I had the control over that. I could shut the book when I wanted to. I can cut the TV off when I want to, or I can watch it all the way through. But when it's done, I am done. And when I'm writing, I can get into it, but I also am, sitting in the driver's seat, and I get to decide about that. So I think in some way, that's why I also like Halloween. And I've always wondered, like, well, I'm more than a grown man. I'm an old man, and I still like to do Halloween like a kid.
Halloween's the best.
Halloween's the greatest. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I would never
want on kids.
Give up. Yeah, on Halloween. I think that's a thing. But I thought, okay, at least that's my justification for why there really can be a positive angle to horror, and why people like to, immerse themselves in it. But that's me, and that's kind of where that goes. And to do the Christmas thing again is especially weird, where people go, why did you do Christmas at horror? But it just needed to be done. And it was sparked because we were doing ghost tours, and it just seemed like, let's do the Victorian thing in the hearse. And I really miss that. Well, it was a pain. It was my wife can tell you how much of a trouble. She was wonderful about that. But to have hot cider ready for everybody, and you had to get the big thermos and fill that up. And she made these wonderful little treat bags, so that instead of them trick-or-treating, we gave them a little bag.
Oh.
So when you did, that was actually the Halloween one. But when we did the Christmas one, they got the hot cider and blankets, because it was cold. And we went into the amphitheater and did all that and had the story. There were several stories, but that was the one story. And it was a haunted theater, and I got to tell them the story behind the haunted theater that had been told to me, that there really was a ghost in that theater. So when they're walking into it, it's like, okay, we're in a spooky place right now. So anyway, yeah. Well, the long answer to it, again, as I always do with the question, more than you asked for, but there's that.
So what's something in your adult life that has scared you? Like either movie, book, experience. Yeah. What scares you? The
Exorcist scared me. I think it's still scary as a movie. I mean, it's hard to have a movie that still, keeps its, scare factor, because we kind of get, desensitized to it. But that one still creeps me out if I'm watching that movie. I haven't watched it that many times, but when I do watch it and they're getting ready to go up the stairs into Reagan's room, it's like, oh God, I'm not ready for this. I don't know that I'm ready for this. So that movie freaks me out. And again, if you have dolls and that kind of thing in the right setting, that will creep me out. Actually, here's I guess the best answer. I don't even go to the horror movies in the theater, because they're just too big. It's like, that's too much. That's overwhelming. I love to watch them on television, but to go to the theater, it's almost like it's overwhelming. And I want to own a haunted house attraction. I don't want to do all that. To go to them, I'm a chicken. I don't like. For one thing, I don't trust people. I really have with people, and I don't think you're going to do it safely. think you're going to do this right. And at some point, we're going to have a serial killer that creeps into one of these places and actually starts killing people. I mean, it's right for that. But I just don't trust people. They're not able to manage things. So those things creep me out as an adult. I will be the biggest chicken. I do like going to them, and I do want to go to them, but I am definitely freaked out when I go to them.
Man, I see.
Well, a story you might appreciate is I used to enjoy haunted houses. And then when I was probably about 16, we went to the Ohio State Fair. And outside of the haunted house was a man. Somebody had hit him in the head with a hammer while he was in the haunted house.
Oh,
and
wow.
So he's outside, his head's all bloody. I'm like, nope, never going to a haunted house again. Never.
Never again.
Yeah. It's been waiting to happen.
Maybe I'd come to yours.
Yeah.
I tell you, I used to work with, back in my home state, I used to work with a crew that held a haunted hayride every year. And so I may see a future with us because we went through the trouble of digging graves. Like I hand built coffins to put out there. We built, I mean, it certainly wouldn't pass residential code, but we built a haunted house that people went into. So I mean, it's just a thing that, like, they say that it's horror is good for depression, and that these kind of stories that get your blood pressure going. I mean, they get you, they get that adrenaline going. It's good for you, I think, to have a little scare in your life. What's that?
Laughter.
Yeah, exactly. Because when David was talking, I'm thinking your anxiety level must be different than mine, because once I read these stories and they're in my head, I don't have control. Like my anxiety takes over, and I don't have control of what my head thinks up afterwards. So count yourself grateful.
But I think the appeal of horror is that whole idea that that you do know you're safe. You do know that you could just end it. So you kind of just like take the training wheels off and kind of wade into it, because you're like, it's okay. This is fine. This is not real. And then you get, and I think that's the appeal of it, that we kind of like allow ourselves to embody these characters and feel what they're feeling and experience their experience with that safety net of knowing, like, it's not actually me. I'm not actually that person. I'm not actually in the story. And at any point I can walk away. So
that dude is completely screwed, but we're good. We're safe.
I'm okay.
Well, I wondered about Jason Chestnut. You write sci-fi. Do you deliberately ever, or would you incorporate horror into, I think you would, in elements of sci-fi? And often there's a big blend.
Absolutely.
Do you like horror in sci-fi?
I do. Some of my favorite sci-fi is horror, like the Alien series of movies.
Right.
I love those. I love the original Alien is one of my favorite movies all time. So, and it's interesting you should say that, because that movie in particular deals with one of the scariest concepts that comes up a lot in horror, is the whole idea of isolation and being isolated in an area with something with the unknown, which is something that comes up in a lot of your stories in the collection, especially the novella. The whole idea of being isolated. So those kinds of things. Fear is a universal thing. Laughter is a universal thing too. So I think that, absolutely, in a science fiction, it obviously works very well. But it is those common things, like the idea of being isolated and trapped with the unknown, which comes the novella, especially as things start to escalate and these things start popping up around the town and nobody can get out of the town. That kind of feeling of things closing in on you is, I think, a very universal thing that you see used in lots of different genres.
Nice.
So absolutely.
Well, that's cool. Well, and you mentioned Alien. I forgot. Alien that movie freaked me out. The first Alien. I mean,
oh yeah.
I think it broke ground. That
was the original Alien was that was a groundbreaking experience.
It broke ground. I broke wind. We just broke.
Everything's broke.
All over the place.
I think that's why, like, it just made me think when we're talking. That's why movies like the Blair Witch Project and there was an alien movie, Fourth Kind, maybe, when they came out and they were the realistic filming, and the whole time you're sitting there watching, like, is this really happening? Like, is this a documentary or is this fake? Yeah. It's like, it was so much scarier when that question was there. Like, then once you had the answer that, oh, this was just all fake and this was a movie, you watch a Blair Witch Project again, it's not scary at all, really. But it's that element of not knowing, like, is this really happening? Because you don't feel in control that way.
Right.
It's a really interesting point too, that about when things are no longer scary to you. And so as a writer, and you're trying to write, I mean, I've read all sorts of different horror. I read a lot of horror, but I also read a lot of bad horror because I'm also cheap. So I get things free from Free Booksy and all that kind of stuff. And so occasionally you get good ones. And, you know, if I get all the deals on that, so read those. But I start thinking about that. Like, I don't like extreme horror. That's actually a category of, oops, I'm getting a little, did y'all get your reminders here? I'm getting a.
No, just you.
Just me. Sorry, my screen just went away, and you know my computer wanted to update. Sorry, computer, you're not going to get to do that now. But the whole idea of like extreme horror. Have you read? I mean, that's just real gross physical body.
Like some Jack Ketchum stuff.
People, I'm not going to put them down for it, but it is not anything I wanted to do. But it makes me think: is that because we've gotten so desensitized that in order to terrify people, we have to do that? So my goal is I want to be able to creep you out if I can, just through telling a story. That's a real big challenge. I think we can gross people out. And like Stephen King said in one of his, you know, essays or in his books about writing, you know, he goes for the gross out sometimes, but if that's all you can do, then to me, it's kind of a cheap out. You know, put them in there. I've got it. It's definitely in my stories. But I hope to have something that kind of just gives you a different feeling. It's much, much creepier. And I'm wondering if I'm going to get to the point where nobody will really appreciate it because it's not scary anymore. It's just like the movies. Have we gotten to the point where it's just harder to make a really good, scary movie?
I would say they've gone really far in the direction of trying to rely on the jump scares and rely on the gore factor, and we're finding out that that's not what's really scary. That's window dressing. What's really scary is the stuff that makes you think about it.
Yeah.
And
the ambiguous, unexplained stuff. Yeah.
And it's the suspense too.
The one you did in the church. So I forget what the title of it was, where he lived in the church, and the whole time there's really not until the end. There's nothing really scary,
right?
Like in the traditional sense, but the whole time I'm like this is a tense story. Like just to live through it. And this guy, he's like, what the hell?
I thought the same thing.
Is going on? You know, that's good. That's good, solid storytelling and horror writing to me, because you're like, you're there, you're trying to figure this out, and it makes you think about things, and it makes you, years later, something will happen, you'll hear something in the attic, and you'll be like, it better not be that fucking thing from
Yeah, well, that was the haunted belfry story. That is a mystery, and like Dawn was saying, like he hears in that story, he hears the bell ringing, but nobody else hears it. So it kind of got a common thing, like the bloody wall. But that idea of like, is it happening? Is it in my head or not? And so through that story, you really don't know whether it's in his head or not. But but he finds out there's a history there that certainly works to go along with it. And he didn't know the story in the first place. So was it the power of suggestion? Couldn't really been. But I do like playing with those ideas. And I do have a friend who's told me before just about things he read. I've forgotten what story. Oh, it was one of the Dark Corner stories that I wrote for a 4th grade student, really, and set it in Riverside Cemetery. And it's about O. Henry gets to be a ghost in the story, the writer O. Henry, because he's buried in Riverside Cemetery. And so my friend wrote back, he says, it's just so nice to actually have a nice ending to a story, and bad things don't happen to the good people. They actually get to live their lives and everything's okay. But I really do. Good people get a bad deal in my stories for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, don't be a married couple in a Voyles story. It'll go horribly wrong for you.
Somebody's not, at least somebody's not making it. not going to make it at
Or
all.
kids. Any kids in your, I don't know how Josh is still.
Yeah, he's still around.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Because the kids in your stories suffer a lot, and very
Yeah.
often, like, you enjoy torturing anybody under the age of like 12.
Yeah. The kids better behave around me. I was a teacher for 30 years.
Maybe that explains it, though.
30 years of teaching, right?
Blades everything.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, now we get it.
The real horror.
That's right. Oh, that's great. Oh yeah, I love that. Dan Aykroyd. Yeah, you want to see something really scary?
Really
I love the Dan Aykroyd line. That's
Still
great.
think about that. I think your books, your stories really do. I grew up on Tales from the Crypt, the actual show, the HBO show, the comic books from way back in the day, and the Twilight Zone. And so I found that that's my basis. That's my base for where all my horror and stuff comes from. And I feel like yours comes from like the same place. Like I feel like your stories they're in that tradition of they have a lot more substance, and they have almost like the moral may not be obvious all the time, but it's trying to tell you something. It's trying to make you think about something. I feel like your stories have they have a lot of substance to them in that way.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I appreciate that. I do think there's an element there. I mean, bad things do happen to good people, and so we have to live in that universe, and that happens a lot in my stories. But I think you're right. A pervasive thing in my stories is you can tell what I ultimately like and appreciate, what values are there, even if the good people do suffer, they're there. And I that is something that's going to be kind of a pervasive thing always. I think. I mean, it's not deliberate. I don't set out to do anything moralistic with stories, but I do think there is an element to them where, I do have people. There's some common things that come up about good people, and there's some real assholes, and they are. And I see you out there in the world, and you're going to make your way into my story, and I'm going to tell you some bad stuff's going to go down. If it doesn't in real life, at least it's going to in my universe.
Exactly.
Well, as long as it's happening in some universe, because it ain't happening here.
Yeah, I know. That's true. That's all too true. So I have to, again, gives you that control, right?
Yeah. I think we do write. I don't know. Do we write what we want to see, or I think a lot of writers do, especially in the horror genre, which is kind of terrifying. We write our own sense of justice. And I mean, I think that is a common theme in every story in 13th Day is a sense of twisted justice. For I mean, some things people didn't know what they were getting into when they got into it, but I think there's still that like you said, that moral backbone that's there, and you get what's coming. And it's really not pretty, especially in the novella. It was
right. And with people like in the 13th Day, where bad things happen to good people, but how they stand up to it is always important too. How do we deal with these things that we're faced with? That's where we often see real courage. It's where we see real morality, is when the things are really tough like that, and things still may not work out. They may not.
Except for the Krampus story, and you were just wrong for that.
It's very true. Yeah, I actually can't see it because I got my Krampus T-shirt on. I even wore this, and then I'm got it the setup here. You can't see my T-shirt, but yeah, the Krampus story. That's one of the stories that I did tell on the ghost tour, by the way. It didn't have the framework when I told it, so that it was just kind of suggested that some bad things were going to happen, to the kids in the story. But when I wrote it into the book, I put a new frame around it. And actually, to kind of give it a little background there, I did bring in family stuff again. The house that's described in actually, I'm thinking of, the Krampus story is actually up on the rooftop. That's the story.
Yes.
And that's a real place that's in Ridgecrest, which is on the other side of Black Mountain here in the Asheville area. My grandmother's father built a house in 1910 before there was the Ridgecrest Baptist Assembly and all that stuff over there. And that's that house, although it's been modified since then. But the way that my grandfather used to come in and tell stories to us, to my brother and myself, and we loved it, and it was great. It had the wood paneled walls and the big bunk beds. So the description of where the kids are, that was where I was telling. And my grandfather was wonderful, and to do what I did in that story is just, like you said, it's just not right. That's just wrong.
Unbelievable. That was wrong.
Yeah, I read that. I was like,
the idea of him telling
hell,
stories,
David?
and I think I included a line. I hope I left it in there. But my grandfather would always sit down when it was time to tell stories, and we were tucked in our beds, and there might be a lantern, just like described in the story, one of those hurricane lamps, and he would say, "Do you want to hear a story when I was a good little boy or when I was a bad little boy?" Well, what kind of question is that? Of course, we wanted to hear I don't even remember if we ever heard a good little boy story. I mean, who wants to hear that? So he would hear stories. They were great. So, but he was a great storyteller. So if I hope that I captured a little bit of things from him. He was one of the Baptist ministers that I was telling you about, but he was a great storyteller. So that was the house that I grew up, or I visited as a boy, and put into that story. So it made its way into the framework of that story about Up on a Rooftop. And I'm sorry to that character. and the other innocent people, I'm so sorry, but Krampus.
I'm not sure I've ever apologized to a character before, but yeah, it's messed up, man. They didn't do nothing.
The one story that hasn't come up though, that I feel like, and it's probably not the best story, I don't know, but I enjoyed the hell out of it, because when I heard there was such a thing as ice hotels.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I said, okay, there's got to be a story there. They got to do something with us.
That was creepy.
I would never. I wouldn't want to stay in it, but people do. That's literally what that's like. Well, not all of it, but
maybe.
yeah.
It might be.
Right?
Now,
Ever been to Iceland?
Yeah.
No, but that's one that sticks with me. Like I said, because I was like, if you don't be a married couple in a Voyles book, and man, I was like, what the crap, man? What a.
That was another bad sound.
It's not going to be a good Yelp review. That's really what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Well, they had it coming. They did have it coming.
They did. Well, they were.
First, you're apologizing, then you're saying they had it coming.
Yeah, they did have it coming. Yeah. Well, that couple did. The couple in the Up on a Rooftop. I'm just sorry. That was just wrong.
Yeah.
But the couple in this was You Better Watch Out. They should have been watching out.
They should have been. There were all kinds of signs.
Yeah.
The bellhop was creepy. The hotel was creepy.
The hotel was creepy.
Like at any point.
To be in a frozen thing like that, but they and they really are. They use the one. I guess they do different themes each year, but one theme was the White Walkers from the Game of Thrones.
Nope.
And those are terrifying.
No, thank you.
The carved stuff over your bed, these big, huge Walking Dead things.
Hell no for me, dog.
That was just, so of course I had to make it Santa and elves and be in the ice and all that kind of stuff. So that was
no, Big Red X. No. No, I'm not doing that. I want to see it, but there's not a chance in hell I'd stay there overnight.
Yeah. That's exactly. There is another part of the hotel, and that's exactly where I'd be. I might take a drink in the ice bar, but not for long. Cool. That's cold.
No, but I gotta go. Sorry.
You wouldn't sit in there and tell stories?
What was that?
Would you say,
sit in there and tell your stories?
Nice.
Yeah, sit in the ice bar and tell your stories.
Yeah, that would be a great place to do it. Yeah,
you should be back.
It'd make them shorter. I finally shut up.
You're like, and then they die. Gotta go.
Yeah,
gotta go.
Everybody dies. Bye.
Yeah, right.
Based on a
everybody's dead. I gotta get a coat. Bye.
Everyone dies horribly.
No, man, because everything in those bars is made of ice, including like the stools and everything. And there's just no way I could. No.
Yeah.
Uh,
And some practical joker would put water on it, and then you'd be frozen and stuck to it. And,
That's how fights happen right there.
it would happen.
Oh, goodness.
Coolest bar
Everybody
fight
dies.
ever. And then there's like snowmen, and they're like, you think they move? No, I'm not going through that.
Well, it's fun to have Christmas in the middle. Well, we're not in summer yet, but it's going to be. And hopefully we can do a Christmas in July, a little push, and maybe get some things happening. And hopefully get another little push. But we're going to have the Tales from the Hearse as a July release. So that'll be fun. So we can.
There's some good stuff in there. Like you said, if anybody wants a preview, you've told a few of those stories on Dark Corners.
Yeah, only a couple, but there are 2 or 3 stories that are there.
And that's gonna be a badass book. And I'm still hoping. Corona has changed the entire world, unfortunately, but I'm still hoping that we can get back on track, and do the 13th Day graphic novel adaptation of that. Because it really is a story that's, like you said, is told visually, and some of the scenes I can't wait to see them. And I think especially in a comic format, it's going to be amazing. It's got that vibe that just translates to the page so well. So I'm excited about that. So I don't know.
That'll be fun. Yeah, that'll be real fun to see. Well, I'm also we're supposed to have a book that talking about the coronavirus. It knocked me out of a whole project where I was traveling around or planning to travel. I just had started. I had gone outside Charlotte to a ghost mining town and taken some pictures there, but to have a whole book based on the Nancy Roberts and Bruce Roberts books and take her stories, but bring them up into the modern times and have scarier pictures and news stories based on those. So that project's on hold. That's going to be next year. We'll do that one. But it did push me into, as I ended the first season of Dark Corners, they were all self-contained or self-standing stories, just independent stories. But here's the big deal that I'm very excited about. The second season is about to start, and it's going to be a true episodic season. So you'll have chapters in books. There'll be 13, of course. Surprise, surprise. But next Wednesday, a week from this coming Wednesday, on the 27th, I think, of May, it'll be the first episode, and that will be every 2 weeks there's a new episode. So it'll finish in October, and I'll have to put the last 2 episodes together on the last on October 28th. You'll have both of them, so they finish, because it's very much a Halloween based story. But we did something kind of interesting. Mamba Ullman does the music and the stories. And you really need to listen to some of those stories because the music's just great. And I've gone through his albums and I listen and I pull stuff and then I butcher them and I apologize to him. And he says, don't worry about it. Use it whatever way you want to. Because I chop up his stuff and I put it in the stories however I want. Well, I've taken one of his albums, which is a very Halloween themed album. It has more of a melodic nature than just the ambient music, called Witchworks.
Witchworks, yeah.
So Witchworks is going to be, it's the story, 13 episodes that will start next week. And so the first episode will air on the 28th, and then it'll take you through October, so right up to Halloween, and it'll be the ending of that story for Witchworks. But taking Mamba Ullman's music, he had really 14 tracks, but the 14th one, he said it was credits. But it's actually the theme music that I use for the Tales from the Hearse video thing. So I've already used it, so I'm not using it in this. But I'm following his 13 tracks, the other 13 tracks, for the basis for each of the chapters. And he had kind of a little storyline already suggested. So that's going to be pretty cool, but it's creepy. It's going to be very, very creepy. But taking the music and then creating a story from that was a kind of fun twist to put to it. So I'm very excited about it. But it's a dark tale for sure.
Awesome.
That's super
which
cool.
works.
Cool.
I like that. That sounds binge worthy.
So stay tuned.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Dude, Mommy's got some creepy music. We're going to use it in the Haunted audiobook that we're releasing, because he's got
really neat stuff. His latest is Wendigo, like the Wendigo creature, from Native American lore and others. But he's got some real neat stories, and then enough that he ended up having a second whole album based on Wendigo type creatures. and he's calling it the Shaman. Shaman's in the title, but I forgot now what it is, and that's just about to be released. And I've heard pieces of that. It's pretty neat. I just did an interview with him, which, by the way, if you go on the Gestalt Media YouTube channel, I did an interview like this, so we got the chance to see who Mombi Ullman is, and we cut in music and examples from his albums and things that we've used as a talk to him about where he gets the ideas for that weird music and where all that ambient stuff comes from. So that was kind of a fun project. So yeah, check it out. It really is. It's neat stuff, and it'll definitely be Jason's going to use it in some of the upcoming things for Haunted, so that'll be fun.
He was way different than I thought he would be. Like, after hearing his music, there's nothing that could have appeared on video that would have like done it justice. And then I saw him, I was like, what the hell?
Nice guy. He is a real nice guy.
But he makes some creepy music. So if you're into that, yeah, for sure. Yep. I mean, it's great, and it's cool that he's letting us use it for Dark Corners, because it adds an element to your.
It does. Oh, without a doubt, it does. He's been very generous and very giving, and he's excited about this collaboration for Witchworks. So that's going to be fun, and I think we'll see what it yields. But I think that we're going to see it maybe in different formats, because that could be a book, because it's 13 chapters. Having to write it episodically myself, but I had to plan it all out. That's what I've been working on lately, is just getting that all hammered out as to what the storyline is, writing the backstories for the characters that'll probably never come through, but I had to know them in order to tell the story. So it's fun, but it's going to be it'll be fun, but maybe just as dark as the 13th Day. We'll just see where it takes. We can hope. But it's Halloween, so more appropriate.
It's going to be a weird Halloween for all of us. So
yeah, it is.
We'll see how that pans out. Hell, somebody else. I forgot what I was going to say. So.
I'm going to have to bail out. I'm being summoned for dinner. They keep waiting on me. So, but I really enjoyed the book, David.
Yeah, thanks.
Try to listen to the podcast.
Yes, thanks. Very good. Very good.
I will try, but I really enjoyed it. And those of you who are watching who haven't read, give it a read. Right.
Thank you very much.
I'll think of you guys.
Thanks, Don.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Don.
All right. Did anybody have any questions they didn't get to ask?
No, everybody asked all my questions, so I'm good.
I was wondering, you didn't say it like the whole time. I was like, man, is she's just waiting for a chance to jump in? Or?
Use my mind powers.
Yeah. And I totally did. And I made everybody ask questions.
Awesome.
That's great.
Well, I'm fine with that. Hell, I mean, all I can say is that this collection is really good. It's phenomenal. It's way more than I expected when I picked it up the first time to read it, when we were considering it. And I was like, I mean, I really didn't know what I expected, but the fact that you hit so many different styles, that you could tell so many different kinds of stories, and it's like reading a full anthology from 13 different authors. And that's really refreshing. Like, you never get bored. The story is never, there's not a mold that you feel like you're into. They don't start to repeat themselves. They're all very unique. They're all different characters and different writing styles and different years, even, like, different eras. And I thought that was really good. I was super impressed by that. So if anybody's looking for something to read right now, this is a hell of a book to choose. So I would definitely do it.
And you definitely don't have to wait till Christmas to read it. You can read it on your own.
Oh, that's cool. And it's short stories. I really like the short story format. I like sitting down to read a short story, and you go, there's the self-contained thing. It's kind of cool.
Done. Yeah.
Just to have that.
Read it and be done and move on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for the discussion. I appreciate y'all having some questions and that you read the stories. That's cool.
Not at all.
Yeah, it was great.
Thanks to everybody for coming, and thanks to everybody that's watching. And you can find David's book if you want to read something that's worth reading at gestalt-media.com/shop. And see y'all next Tuesday. We'll be doing my book. We'll be doing Ghost Story.
Yay.
So tune in then, and we'll see you all. So, everybody wave bye.
Yay, bye.
Bye.